The man known to history as Hadrian, or Publius alias Hadrianus, was born in 76 AD in the southern Spanish provincial city of Italica. His mother, Domitia Paulina, was of Spanish descent, her family hailing from the wealthy city of Gades, modern-day Cadiz, which was one of the wealthiest cities in Roman Spain. Hadrian's father, Publius alias Hadrianus Afer, was a wealthy Roman senator who had also served in the Roman army. Indeed, his mother, Uplia, was the sister of Marcus Ulpius Trajanus, who was the biological father of the future Roman Emperor, Trajan. Indeed, this link with Trajan would prove to be crucial to Hadrian's advancement later in his life. The Roman Empire of the late 1st century was vast, having been gradually expanded over the previous 3 centuries in various wars against rival kingdoms and tribes throughout Europe and beyond. It had few, if any, rivals that could match its wealth, technological advancement, and arguably, most importantly, its military, which was perhaps the most advanced, organised and capable fighting machine the world had ever seen up until that time. However, despite Rome's supremacy, it had, since the reign of Augustus, been ruled over by one man, the Emperor. After the death of Julius Caesar by assassination in 44 BC, his nephew, Augustus, had claimed power in a bloody civil war and then made himself the first Roman emperor. Since then, power in the empire lay in the hands of the emperors, in collaboration with the Roman army, which would itself become the real arbiter of power in the Roman Empire over the following centuries, as no emperor could hope to last for long without its powerful backing. Indeed, the Roman emperor at the time of Hadrian's birth was Vespasian, who had himself seized power with the backing of the Eastern legions of the Roman army in 69 AD. After his death in 79 AD, supreme power in Rome had been handed down to Vespasian's sons, Titus and then later Domitian, who would himself rule the empire for 15 years. When Hadrian was 9 or 10 in 86 AD, both his mother and father died, meaning that he and his older sister were placed under the protection of Publius Attianus and their second cousin, Trajan, who by this time was an important army officer with his own command. Trajan had also been born in the Spanish city of Italica, but although he saw himself, as did Hadrian, as an upstanding Roman, they faced resentment and ridicule from the old Roman nobility, who did not take well to anyone from the provinces who aspired to office within Rome itself. After his parents' death, Hadrian initially stayed in Spain for 4 years, but was later summoned by Trajan to Rome in around 91 AD. Nearly at the same time, Trajan himself was given the powerful position of consul. Hadrian would continue to expand his education whilst in Rome, and earned himself the nickname Greekling, due to his love of all things Greek. Indeed, Greek culture would become one of the greatest influences and loves of Hadrian's life. He then returned to Spain and was further educated in more practical skills such as hunting and the outdoor sports, which were in essence a kind of basic training for later military service. Hadrian then went back to Rome aged 18 to take a role in the imperial administration, before joining the army as a tribune or officer and serving with various legions near the river Danube in modern-day Eastern Europe, and after proving his ability was promoted and posted to the 5th Legion in the modern-day Balkans. Then, in 96 AD, the Emperor Domitian was assassinated by court officials, which prompted the Roman Senate to then appoint the aged Marcus Cocius Nerva as the new emperor. This was a strange choice, as Nerva was old and childless, meaning that he was bound to only be emperor for a short time, which proved to be the case. He was also highly unpopular with the Roman army, which led to him to seek its backing by appointing Hadrian's cousin, Trajan, as co-emperor and his adopted son and successor. Indeed, it is suggested that Nerva was forced by Trajan to name him as his successor, as if he didn't, Trajan would depose him by force. This agreement met with the favour of the military, as Trajan himself was highly popular with the ordinary Roman soldiers, and given Nerva's age, Trajan was likely to be emperor sooner rather than later. All of a sudden, Trajan, and indeed Hadrian, were catapulted into the limelight of power within Rome, and as Trajan himself had no children, Hadrian was the front-runner, or at least a strong candidate, to become the next emperor himself. It was therefore no surprise that only 1 year and 4 months after attaining power, the aged Nerva died, meaning that Trajan was subsequently proclaimed emperor. His ascension to power also marked a considerable turning point in Roman history, as he was the first Roman emperor, other than Claudius, to have been born outside Italy itself. Indeed, he was firmly seen by the old Roman nobility as an outsider, which did nothing but prompt Trajan to promote more outsiders, including Hadrian, to powerful positions within his administration and the Senate. This in return greatly annoyed the old Roman aristocracy, but they had little choice but to accept the new emperor's decisions, as he had, after all, the support of the military. Hadrian's continued rise to power was also aided by his close ties with Trajan's wife Plotina, who was herself also Spanish and had, along with her husband Attianus, who himself would become Hadrian's bodyguard, raised and protected Hadrian after his father's death. Being an intelligent and influential woman, Plotina may have in some respects been responsible for Hadrian's education in Greek culture, which she herself held to be superior to Rome's own. Indeed, as her marriage with Trajan was childless, she perhaps looked upon Hadrian as her own son, and would later, in around 100 AD, arrange the marriage of Hadrian to her grandniece, Sabina. Hadrian was less than pleased about the arrangement, however, being disposed to the intimate company of men rather than women, and his marriage to Sabina would prove to be notoriously distant and cold. In 101 AD, Hadrian was elected to become a quaestor within the Roman Senate, as which he would act as a go-between between the emperor and the Senate itself. There were, by this time, a large number of senators who, like Hadrian, hailed from the provinces, but there still remained a hard core of the old Roman aristocracy within the chamber. On one occasion, Hadrian read a speech of the emperor's to the Senate, which sparked a chorus of laughter within the chamber due to his accent and pronunciation. Hadrian then took this to heart and endeavoured afterwards to improve his Latin until he spoke the language as well as possible. Given as previously stated, the real power within the empire was based on the backing of the military, Trajan had to spend a large amount of time securing its approval. He then sought to bring this about by embarking on his now legendary invasion of the area of Eastern Europe, then called Dacia. But taking on the Dacians was a risky venture for the Roman Empire, as it had fought with them before during the reign of Domitian, in which an entire legion was massacred. Trajan wasn't swayed by this, however, and he then crossed the border of the Roman Empire into Eastern Europe, along with Hadrian, at the head of 2 legionary columns, backed up by as many as 9 legions, which numbered in the region of 70 to 80,000 troops or more. Hadrian was in Trajan's personal entourage at the start of the campaign, but was later excused military service and returned to Rome to take the post of tribune of the plebs. This was an administrative position which in essence was supposed to represent the interests of the public within the Roman government. In the meantime, Trajan's armies advanced into the heart of Dacia, burning villages and settlements along the way, until they met and defeated the armies of the Dacian king, Decebalus, at the Second Battle of Tepai in September 101 AD. However, Trajan then grew concerned about the onset of winter, and decided to wait until the following spring before resuming hostilities. Decebalus then used this lull in the fighting to regroup his forces, and he then launched a counter-attack in the winter of 101 to 102 AD, which resulted in another defeat for the Dacians in the Battle of Adamclisi. This reversal in essence forced the Dacian king to sue for peace, which was then agreed in 102 AD, with favourable terms for the Romans over their defeated enemies. This effectively resulted in a large part of Dacia along the Danube being ceded to Rome, while Dacia itself would become a vassal-like state which would receive money and troops from Rome in return for acting as a buffer zone between it and the various migrating tribes to the east. Decebalus had no intention of being Rome's vassal, however, and after an interval of several years in which he used Rome's money to rebuild his forces and fortifications, he launched a surprise attack in 105 AD into the region of Dacia he had lost to Rome 3 years before. This took Trajan by surprise at first, but he soon gathered his forces and constructed a massive bridge over the Danube, now named Trajan's Bridge, which according to accounts spanned over 3,700 feet in length. This formed the gateway which Trajan's legions then used to march headlong into the Dacian heartlands, marking the start of the Second Dacian War in 105 AD. Hadrian was again in Trajan's personal service during the early stages of the campaign, but later went off to command his own legion during the conflict. This helped to mark Hadrian out as a commander, which would later be crucial in helping him to secure his popularity with the Roman army in the coming years. Trajan's armies then marched into the heart of Dacia, this time advancing in 3 columns which then surrounded the Dacian capital of Sarmizegetusa in modern Transylvania. After besieging the city and cutting off its water supplies, Sarmizegetusa eventually fell, and it was then razed to the ground to prevent it from being used as a rallying point in the future. Decebalus had managed to escape the city during its fall, but had also hidden the contents of his massive treasury somewhere nearby, but its location was revealed to the Romans by a member of the Dacian king's entourage, leading to its recovery. Supposedly, the treasure consisted of over 150 metric tons of gold and over 300 metric tons of silver. This was then used after the Dacian War to help fund various building projects and celebrations. One of these still stands in Rome to this day, being Trajan's Column, which depicts the chain of events of the Dacian Wars, and is still one of the primary sources on the conflict for historians. Decebalus was himself then tracked down and cornered, but he committed suicide by slitting his throat to prevent himself from being taken alive. Rome was now victorious and Dacia was now firmly under its control, but Trajan's campaigns would prove to be some of the last great expansions of the empire, as after his reign, merely maintaining the massive expanse of Roman territory would prove to be difficult enough, without the added costs in money and manpower of further expansion. Hadrian himself had emerged from the Dacian Wars as a seasoned military commander, and now also had gained first-hand experience in the everyday lives of Roman soldiers, which would later prove to be crucial in him being able to keep the Roman army on his side. He was then in 107 AD made the governor of Lower Pannonia, partly as a reward and partly due to his knowledge of the region which was near the former Dacian territories. The appointment may also have been down to his military experience, as there was a number of hostile barbarian tribes to the north and west, including the Sarmatians, who had been allied with the Dacians against Rome in Trajan's wars. Hadrian was now, despite only being in his early 30s, a high-ranking general, as well as a talented administrator and politician. He was clearly marked out for greater things, and this was further borne out when, in 108 AD, he was elected to become one of Rome's 2 consuls, despite his young age. The post was the highest administrative position within the Roman state, and represented the pinnacle of Hadrian's political career before becoming emperor himself. After his tenure as consul ended, Hadrian then travelled to Athens in around 112 AD, where he was made the city's chief magistrate for a short time. This reaffirmed his love and connection with the city and Greece itself, but after this not much is known about Hadrian's life, which seems to have been a period of relative obscurity for him, until once again he was summoned to accompany the emperor on his next large-scale military expedition against Rome's great rival in the east, Parthia. The Parthians were one of the few people who could match Rome's power. Indeed, they had, like the Dacians before them, been responsible for defeating and humiliating Roman armies in past confrontations. They proved themselves to be, perhaps, the most stubborn and persistent of Rome's enemies during the middle period of the empire, and Rome would continually struggle to make or hold any of its periodic gains in the Middle Eastern region during its various wars against Parthia. Another reason for the forthcoming war was that Parthia had placed its own puppet king onto the throne of Armenia, who Rome found unacceptable. Indeed, both Rome and Parthia had had a kind of shared overlordship of the Kingdom of Armenia since the reign of Nero, and therefore Parthia placing its own king onto the Armenian throne without Rome's approval was seen as grounds for an invasion. Trajan possibly had other motives for an expansion into the east, as it is suggested that he wanted to also gain control over the eastern trade routes which passed partly through the Persian Gulf ports in modern-day southern Iraq, which had access to India and the Far East. The expedition had been long in the planning and involved up to a dozen legions which again, like Trajan's Dacian campaigns, numbered in the region of 80,000 plus troops. Hadrian was appointed to Trajan's entourage once again and accompanied the emperor to secure Armenia in late 114 AD, and his forces then marched south into Mesopotamia itself, where he finally took the city of Charax, near the northern shores of the Persian Gulf, in 116 AD. This marked the furthest extent of Rome's eastern expansion, and in many ways Trajan's reign marked the high point of the Roman Empire in terms of its size. The emperor had successfully reduced the Parthians to the status of a near-vassal state, but the campaign had taken a considerable toll on his health, as he was now in his early 60s. Hadrian was then made governor of Syria later in the Parthian campaign, which effectively placed him in charge of the eastern armies after Trajan's impending departure from the eastern theatre. The emperor then left the Middle East to return to Rome in the summer of 117 AD, as his health was declining further, but he was destined never to enter the imperial city again, and died on the 8th of August 117 AD in modern-day southern Turkey. As he had no children, Trajan's succession had been in a state of confusion for some years, but then, one day after the emperor's death, his wife Plotina presented a document which stated that the emperor, on his deathbed, had adopted Hadrian as his son and successor. This was controversial, as the emperor had not signed the document himself, leading to rumours that Hadrian was Plotina's choice as successor and not Trajan's. But it is highly likely that Hadrian was Trajan's intended successor, as he was the emperor's highest ranking and most experienced direct relative. Hadrian was however fortunate that a large number of Rome's legions were already under his command in the Middle East due to the Parthian campaign. This made securing the army's approval of him becoming emperor easier, as well as making any rival claim elsewhere in the empire more difficult, as no one could match the sheer numbers of Hadrian's troops in the east. The Eastern Legion's loyalty was then secured with the customary bonus or bribe, and Hadrian was proclaimed Caesar by the Eastern armies. He then sent a letter to the Senate, who had little choice but to accept his succession. Hadrian was now the emperor of the largest and most powerful empire the world had ever known, with the start of his reign coinciding with Rome being at the very zenith of its power. The empire now stretched from northern England to the deserts of North Africa, and from the shores of western Spain to the shores of the Persian Gulf. The new emperor was now faced with the difficult challenge of securing his own rule, and then the choice of either further expanding or securing the empire's borders. His predecessor Trajan had been one of the most successful and popular of all Rome's emperors, but would Hadrian now emulate or surpass his predecessor, or squander his great inheritance? The decisions and pressure he now faced were huge, and the new emperor would need all of his knowledge, experience and skill to overcome the challenges which lay before him.